Our next speaker this morning is Mario Tenuta. And so he is the NSERC WGRF Fertilizer Canada Senior Industrial Research Chair and for our Nutrient Stewardship and Professor of Applied Soil Ecology at the U of M. And so I'm going to speed through this one and just say, take it away, Mario. Exactly. And we will see what he has to say about more of a local perspective on the N2 emission stuff.
Excellent. Thanks, Marla. So Tammy and Marla said I have a good hour to be able to speak to you today. So this is excellent. Thank you. Thank you, ladies. So we have two options, folks. What do you want as a title to this presentation? This first one? Or that one? Can you see a difference? Okay, which one do you want? This one? Put up your hand. This one? Put up your hand. Oh, that's good, because I've only prepared for this one. All right. So, nitrous oxide emissions. Tom did an excellent job of the background and a lot of detail. A global perspective. We're going to talk about the Manitoba perspective. Let's just look at where this stuff comes from, this nitrous oxide. And direct N2O emissions, that's from soil, from the use of nitrogen fertilizers, but also any time nitrogen is added to soil, okay? And it released through two processes, one through nitrification, which obviously our crops require for nitrate and uptake, and then the other is through denitrification under more anaerobic or wet soil conditions where nitrate is used, okay? As Tom mentioned, very little N2O is emitted from the nitrogen applied to soil, okay? It is not really an agronomic issue per se for N2O. It is an environmental issue because of the potency of N2O and also because of the fact that soils are the largest source of N2O emissions, okay? But there's more to the story, and that is indirect emissions. And the first one I'm talking about here is ammonia volatilization. When ammonia, let's say from urea at the surface or from manure at the surface that has a lot of ammoniacal or urea in it, hydrolyzes to ammonium ammonia, pH goes up and it volatilizes. And it's in the upper atmosphere. Some of that ammonia gets converted to N2O. So that's an indirect emission, okay, indirect emission. However, ammonia loss can be very significant in terms of nitrogen losses, making up anywhere from 0 to probably very worst case scenarios, 20% of nitrogen applied if it's left at the surface under right environmental, right conditions, weather conditions. So this is an agronomic issue, but it's also related with N2O production. And the third is nitrate leaching. And this is one aspect here that we're really lagging or do not understand very well at all in Manitoba or on the prairies. And this is another source of N2O. When nitrate in groundwater or surface waters denitrifies from bacteria, producing a small portion of N2O. Again, this can be very, very agronomically important as a nitrogen loss pathway. I put a worst case scenario here of 40%. Obviously, that's going to be on a sand soil under probably wet winters, coming in the fall, going into the winter, and wet spring. Maybe in some cases, let's say, like with potato production, okay, where we also have irrigation during the summer. Okay, but again, this is another source. What I'm going to talk to you about today is primarily about that direct source, a little bit about the ammonia, and nothing about the nitrate. Okay, so when the first thing to realize is, hey, he's only talking about a portion of the picture here. And not only that, the government, in terms of its reduction of 30% emissions, is really just targeting the direct emissions from, let's say, the fertilizer use. We're not even talking about the nitrate losses. We're not talking about the ammonia losses at all yet. There's lots of room for improvement, okay? And practices, like 4R practices to get reductions. Now, how do we do what we do in terms of measurement. Well, the first thing, and I'm very proud of this, is we do largely on-farm field research. It's something that Don Flayton showed to me, the value of working on farmer fields. Our station fields, university research station fields are great. However, there's just too much nitrogen mineralization, too much residual nitrogen. It just doesn't act as good as a farmer's field. We have lower residual nitrates to start with, so we can do nitrogen response studies, which is key to what I'm going to be showing you here. Okay, and then it gets us out and about in the countryside. Okay, and it gets us different soils. It's just fantastic. So we work on farm fields. We're moving now even to have the farmers do the implementation of the treatments with commercial scale equipment. That's pretty phenomenal and fun. I like it because we don't have to put the treatments in and so forth, and they can do a lot more sophisticated than we can. Our bread and butter is those plastic looking things under the corn there. Those are chambers. We put a lid on that chamber, and then for about 30 minutes we collect the gas with syringes, put them into vials, and then we have a big laboratory with, well, it's a small laboratory, but it's filled with lots of machines, and we pump through 70,000 to 80,000 gas samples a year through that laboratory. And you can see the students collecting in the field. We usually have to have a crew, 2 to 4 students driving out. Again, because we work on farmers' fields, we're driving long distances. We had sites in Manitou. Right now we have a site near Clearwater with Lanny's farm. And so it's a lot of driving. And I dare say a lot of greenhouse gas production from getting there with the students. But another cool one is, as in the bottom right, is where we do continuous measurements all year long, and we have the T-gas man at Glenlee National Center for Livestock and the Environment that's been operating since 2005, measuring continuous N2O and CO2. So we have different methodologies here, approaches to measuring N2O, and we're going to see what we get. So this is a summarization for part of that data set from the T-gas man, that long-term study site. And that key thing here is that whenever we add nitrogen to soil, you're going to get N2O emissions, okay? And the other thing is the more you add, the more N2O you get. There's a little bit of a controversy. Is it a straight line or is it a curved line? If it's a curved line, that means as you add more, you get even a more substantial increase in N2O emissions, okay? It looks like for here in the Red River Valley, it's that curve linear, okay? And we're talking here, as soon as we start getting some pretty significant N2O emissions for whole season emissions when we're very high, let's say with corn, with grain corn, those are those high levels there, and they're pretty wet years to get substantial increases. And notice we're talking 15, 20 kilograms, way more than the typical what we kind of measure, which is about 1 kilogram of N2O, let's say, with crops that more canola or wheat with lower than nitrogen rates than grain corn. So this is a dilemma. You add N, you get N2O. You add manure N, you get N2O. You add residue N, you get N2O. It's just not fertilizers, you know. It's an equal opportunity system here for N2O emissions. Now, there are things, and you know this, you work with your clients, and there's options out there, and the options are becoming more and more in terms of enhanced efficiency fertilizers that are, in some cases, marketed to reduce N2O emissions, but for sure to improve nitrogen use efficiency, right? So these enhanced efficiency products, we call them stabilizers, or inhibitor products, and they come in the urease inhibitor form, the nitrification inhibitor form, or the dual form, okay? And you can see the products there. Many of these products you're probably very familiar with. It's, in some cases, it's the Wild West in terms of products out there. They vary in chemistries, they vary in active ingredients, and so forth. So we're going to talk about these, and in particular this mode of action here, where nitrification inhibitors prevent really the first step in nitrification. And this as I'm going to show you, really whopples the N2O emissions in terms of reducing it, okay? So nitrifiers, so, you probably learned from Don Flayton and others about denitrification and produces N2O, right, and stuff like that. And I'm not sure if Don changed his story but before he retired or in the refresher courses that he's going to give in January, February. I don't know. Usually when I say something, he tends to ignore it. But the nitrifiers are doing their thing as they should, trying to produce nitrate, but under wet conditions, there's a little bit of an oxygen reduction in the soil. And they need to save oxygen to do that first step of nitrification. That's really the critical thing that releases energy for them to use. So what they do a really smart thing. They take the nitrite that they just produced and they use that instead of oxygen to breathe, like you and I are breathing, okay? So we refer to this actually as nitrifier denitrification. And this is what happens after you add fertilizer to soil, especially in at plant or pre-plant, and we get this burst of N2O emissions following a rainfall. Okay, so that's dominant. And this probably makes up a good 60 to 70%, if not more, of the N2O that is produced in a whole year in a typical Manitoba agricultural soil. Let's show you some data now. You can see the urea going up in terms of N2O emissions. This is the students have measured over time. And a nice peak there. The nitrogen addition was before the measurement time that started there in early May. And then it was a rainfall, and this is very typical. After that rainfall, a few days later, we get this spike of N2O emissions. It's like clockwork, okay? It's predictable. Now, look at the ESN, environmentally smart nitrogen, polymer-coated, controlled release, based on temperature and moisture in soil. And what do we see here? A delay in that emission, right? It's much later, and this makes sense because it's a controlled release and it's a delayed release of N of urea coming out of that polymer coating, right? And if there's rains later on in the growing season, I shouldn't say later on, I said it's really still early to mid growing season, we can get N2O. If there's not much rain, then we're not going to get any or much N2O at all with ESN. But I want you to look at the purple. Purple, Super U. Super U is what? Single, double inhibitor, urease, or nitrification inhibitor? What is it? Sorry? Double. Double, it's got both, right? Yeah, excellent. What do you see for N2O emissions? Pretty cool, huh? Wopples it, right? It's the nitrification inhibitor that is really doing that action, okay? We could have replaced it with entrench, which would have been a specifically single nitrification inhibitor. We would see a similar thing to that in terms of really bringing it down. So nitrification inhibitors are tremendously effective in our soils here, especially for pre-plant and at-plant applications of nitrogen. Wonderful. I started this business in 1990 with my master's, and for whatever, how many years, a good 20 plus years, made no progress in reducing N2O emissions. Till we started seeing the advent of these inhibitors. Just fantastic. It's just kind of, I said, I was really worried about retiring and not making any contribution. I actually still worry about that. But I don't want to be in the situation. No, I won't say anything bad about Don. That's okay. We're going to move on. Now, let's talk about in-season. Some of you will recommend in-season, especially like with grain corn or something like that, right? Dribble, stream, so forth. What happens? Can we reduce N2O emissions? Yes, we can. UAN dribbled in-season, a V4 stage in corn. You can see the emissions after a rainfall. Okay, with agrotane, which is a urease inhibitor alone, streamed, we get a reduction of N2O, which I'm actually quite surprised, very surprised. But with agrotane plus, which contains a nitrification inhibitor, okay, a DCD, you can see quite a reduction in that blue emissions, right? Very effective, even for in-season, okay? So it's excellent. We do have options, okay? options for at-plant, pre-plant reductions. We do have options for in-season application as well. Now remember, this is a stream or just surface. We look at study. This gentleman here, Cody, this is his work for his master's, looking at N2O emissions with grain corn. And in red up top is the Urea, Broadcast Incorporated. You can see the emissions, and where I have in green there, the emissions are lower with what? Super U Incorporated at plant or pre-plant. UAN injected V4, okay, so that's a dressing, a side dress, lower emissions, or UAN surface applied, so streamed with the Agrotane Plus with the DCD, okay. I also have to say that Lanny, who's here, is the gentleman that applied these products. So he does a good job. So I trust the work really well. And so we, it's very effective. You can see yourself the reductions there. Okay, I don't have it exactly right there in terms of good 40% reduction of N2O. Can we do it? Can we do the 30%? I think so. Let's look, this is on spring wheat. This is synthesizing, I believe, 9 site years across Manitoba. And you can see, just look at the top panel. And you see those 2 bars that are lower next to each other. That is Super U and Entrench. Remember, Entrench is a single nitrification inhibitor, nitropyrin. I think Tammy sells that stuff. Yeah, Tammy sells that stuff. Yeah, she's got some in her car right now. And you can see they're both really effective in reducing N2O emissions. Beautiful. Right across Manitoba, we had sites in central west Manitoba, Valley, in between, Carmen area, St. Claude, stuff like that. So just fantastic. Now, we can do other things than just spend our money on inhibitors. We can do practices such as placement, where we put the fertilizer, okay? And look at this. At Carmen, this would have been with wheat, Urea Incorporated, pre-plant. You can see the highest emissions. These are cumulatives now, so they cap off. When they flatline, that means no more emissions because, you can see it happens early on with that nitrification occurring and following a rain. Urea side-banded, less emissions. Urea mid-row banded, less emissions, okay. ESN, the polymer coat, mid-row banded, less. And Super U mid-row banded, same as ESN and less. Okay, so we can actually get compound benefit here of the banding and of an inhibitor or a controlled released product. Wonderful. That's a wet year on the left side, and those are the good old days. I haven't seen a year like that in a few years. On the right is different soil at Oak Bluff on clay versus, and you can see in that year we have less general emissions, but exact same pattern. Exact same relative pattern for emission reductions with the placement and the enhanced efficiency products. This is on potato. Potato is quite different for nitrogen management of potato because we have fertigation also options here in Manitoba. But the very top is Urea Broadcast Incorporated pre-plant, followed by ESN, and you can see there's a reduction there. But when we did banding, actually it was a double banded on either side of the seed piece at planting, we got a reduction and an even further reduction with ESN planted. So no fertigation here in this study, okay? But in a dry year, the effects are not very clear. We still get more with the Broadcast Incorporated at planting, and then the others follow lower, but it doesn't really pan out much. So which was another thing in that under really wet years, you get a strong impact and benefit in terms of the N2O reductions. In the very dry years, it gets kind of compressed, and statistically it becomes more difficult to find a difference, okay? But the key thing is, in those wet years, that's when most of the N2O was produced. We want to reduce emissions. Those are the years that we really want things to be effective, and they do tend to be, okay? And the other is urease inhibitors, which slow down the hydrolysis to produce ammonium and ammonia. And look at the emissions of ammonia. Now, this is ammonia, qualitative emissions of ammonia. The UAN dribbled or streamed into V4 corn. So you can see the flat line because it stops emitting. With Agrotane Plus, which is that nitrification inhibitor and urease inhibitor, that's next in line. Then Agrotane, which is just a sole urease inhibitor. Hi. And you can see what happens when we add the nitrification inhibitor. It kind of backs up the system a little bit. Actually, it actually encourages emissions of ammonia compared to the urease product alone, the Agrotane, right? So we don't want to recommend putting a nitrification inhibitor at the surface of the soil with urea, okay? Don't do that. If you're going to use a nitrification inhibitor, use it in the soil. If you're going to use a urease inhibitor, use it for nitrogen that is urea nitrogen placed at the surface of soil and left there. Okay? If you add it in soil, you're wasting money for your client, okay? Now we could also control where we put the nitrogen. This is with top dressing and side with corn at V4 again. The surface, Liney streamed and left it at the surface. You can see big emissions of ammonia with a shallow side dressing and that's, Liney, what deep would be shallow? 1 to 2 inches, and then the deep, 3 to 4 inches. He's telling me exactly what I want to know. What happened in the field, God knows. No. And you can see, look, get it away from the surface, get it into soil. Meta-analysis shows around 4 inches, you get no emissions. Okay, get it down there. All right, now what can we say? This summarizes our work, a lot of work since 2010. And really, it's polymer-coated urea here works in terms of reducing emissions, about 30% reduction. Nitrification inhibitors, a little over 30% reductions. Split nitrogen application, which I haven't talked much about here, but if you split your nitrogen, you get that in-season nitrogen away from the wet period in the spring for our climate, and you reduce N2O emissions. That works really good on longer season crops like corn, grain corn, and potato. Okay? We've tried it on canola. It works on canola, a little dicey with the canola in terms of getting the yield and so forth with a split, right? And the other is N-fixing legumes, which I haven't talked about, but really to me it's a no-brainer because you had so much data. You grow soybean, you grow alfalfa, you grow faba bean, you grow a crop that fixes its own nitrogen, and you will get very little N2O. It's just about the same as background, which is about 30% of the N2O that comes from soil, just comes naturally from mineralization of nitrogen, okay? We can do it. And Jason's had enough. Thank you, Jason. And then we have so our confidence levels in terms of our research results, I would say we have enough data to say with confidence that the ESN does do the reduction in N2O. We could say nitrification inhibitors as well, and nitrogen-fixing legumes. The others, we need more site years, which we are getting right now. Pretty soon we'll be able to, with confidence, say that the split is reducing N2O emissions, and we need more for the fall application, which we do see a spike in N2O at spring thaw. I am going to just say one last thing here before leaving you, and that is the payoff. Your clients need to make money or else they're not going to pay you, okay? And so, a couple of things here. This is with nitrification inhibitors. To pay back, a couple of things are options. One is an increase in yield, okay, by using an inhibitor to pay for the product. We generally do not see an increase in yield, okay? And Liz just nodded, yes, agreeing with that. And that's because we're doing a good job in our nitrogen program, okay? If you don't get yield, you got to get something else, okay? One of them could be reducing your nitrogen rate to pay. And I think that kind of makes sense. If we're reducing losses, we should be able to get by with less N, right? Okay. Now, I don't think we should get by with 30% less N, but I think about 10% will pay for the inhibitor. I think that's a pretty smart way to go, at least to try out in your fields. Another approach is to play the market, the carbon market. Now, that's a little tough one. I showed here comparing Morden versus Windsor, Ontario. And we need the carbon tax to go up to $300 to start paying off for the double inhibitor, okay? Whereas in Windsor, where they produce a lot more N2O than here, they're already at an economic playing a market for reduction, okay? Ask yourself, what is it in it for your growers? We just don't want to use this stuff, pay for it, and rob our profits, okay? But that's just going to give a bad name to the whole approach. Think about that. Is it yield? Is it carbon markets? Is it nitrogen rates reduction to make it pay off? Okay, with that, thank you very much for your attention. I'm only glad only one person walked out on me.
Don't run away just yet, Mario, because there's probably going to be questions. Any questions in the room? Throw your hands. We've got a couple. John's going to run to you. As he's running, I have a reminder for the poster break pitches. Timmy, Jacob, Laura, and James, come on down to the front because we're going to get you in line to give those pitches once we're done our Q&A.
Mario, do you know of any product to add to manure to function as an inhibitor? And if you don't, I do.
Add to what?
To manure.
Oh, yes. So some of those products can be added to manure. So entrench can be added. And also, let me get this right, can Centuro be added, I believe? And so yes, they can be added, okay? Read your label. Yep.
Okay, John, do you have a question?
Mario, that information you just presented, can we find that on the Fertilizer Canada website?
Which information?
Just the presentation there on the losses and the products and the work you've participated with.
No, it's not on the Fertilizer Canada website. We're going to try to get it available on the www.soilecology.ca. But Steve, if you want that presentation, $15.
Or you can steal it off of our proceedings because the video is probably going to be put up there, I would suspect, at some point, unless you said no, Mario.
There goes your 15
we,
bucks.
we have to talk about that, Tammy.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll negotiate later. Sorry.
I think you need to start charging more than that, Mario, but okay.
Good morning, Mario.
Hi, Edgar.
Just, I noticed you had the difference between mid-row banding and side banding in emissions. Can you just elaborate what your thoughts are on the why? And is it a physical thing or is there something else going on?
It's a great question. So why does, first of all, why does banding in general have less N2O emissions than Broadcasting Corp? I think it's because banding is a natural nitrification inhibitor on its own because the high N concentration slows down, overwhelms the bacteria. So I think that is one reason why there's less N2O. Now, how between mid and side is interesting because with mid, you're doubling we're doubling the concentration of nitrogen. And so some people argue that we should get an increase in N2O emissions with that, okay? So my confidence level in that is moderate, okay? We need more studies on the comparison of the side and the mid. Now, when you look at the literature will definitely say that banding increases N2O emissions in other areas, other regions, okay? And so I'm not quite sure why. It could be because there's more moisture, and also a lot of those studies in the literature were done with simulating banding using hose, where they were just manually hoed in, fertilizer placed in, and then soil put on top and then stepped on it. And so, whereas we're using farm machinery. That's a bit of a controversy. When I show the banning results at conferences, colleagues say it's wrong. Then I tell them they're wrong. And we get nowhere. No.
So, Dr. Tenuta, it's Johnson over here.
That's going to be $15 for your question, please. You can
I'm
pay-
astounded it's only 15. I thought it would be 50.
It goes up with every question, Peter.
Okay, fair enough. But it's to 4-H. It's not to Mario. It's to 4-H.
Yeah, that'd be good. That's a good point. Let's do
okay.
that.
Anyway.
Or ag in the classroom. Something.
So you went really fast over the most important point out of your entire presentation, and that was you said no nitrification inhibitor on the surface, and then Tammy said put it with manure, but I'm putting it on the surface with manure. And then I totally missed where you said don't use a urease inhibitor because you're costing your people money. Like those are really key points. Can you just reiterate those so that because that's where the rubber hits the road, right?
Okay. So urease, let's start with the urease one, simpler. We want to prevent ammonia from accumulating rapidly and overwhelming the soil's pH buffering ability, right? If the nitrogen is in the soil at a depth, we don't have so much to worry about, right? Because there's a depth of soil to buffer that pH change, okay, to absorb the ammonia. So that's the first. So what I'm saying is, if it's subsurface placed, you don't have to worry about adding a urease inhibitor. I wouldn't spend money on it. Now the nitrification inhibitor, if you put urea with a nitrification inhibitor, put it at the surface, what it's going to do is back up the progression of nitrification, and it's going to allow ammonia or ammonium to build up, right? We don't want that to happen at the surface. Now, if we add a nitrification inhibitor to manures, let's say we add it to slurry, okay? Let's ask AgriGold. What's the major form of nitrogen in pig slurry? NH4. Will a urease inhibitor do anything to NH4 plus? It won't. Right? So we don't have to worry about so much of a backup occurring, okay? Because it's not going to build up. So does that help? Do you buy that? With urea.
John,
So,
do you wanna
but with manure, it's not going to be the same problem because we don't have the urea forming the ammonia and just staying as ammonia. It's already in the ammonium form.
Okay, bad cop over here, timekeeper. Come on, you guys can.
I was gonna say,
I'm looking for an Indian leg wrestle out in the foyer later. That'll be fine. You two can have that
Tammy's going to sit in the
conversation then.
corner and bad cop it all the way through. Plus, we're losing Peter's voice because the mic wasn't there, so nobody online could hear the conversation anymore. But we have a couple questions online we're going to wrap up with.
Okay, so are there additives or carriers that act like cation or anion exchange sites that can reduce N2O emissions? I think I butchered that a little bit, but do additives or carriers that act like cation, anion exchange sites for fertilizers work at reducing nitrous oxide emissions?
I'm just going to make it quick. No. N2O is not an anion or a cation, so it's not going to absorb that way.
And do we know the current percent of use on farm of N inhibitors across the West?
Yes, we do, based on the national fertilizer use surveys that happens every year. So we're enhanced efficiency fertilizers in general is about almost 10% in terms of a farmer having used it. That doesn't mean the 10% of fields, that means they've used it. So 10%, and probably of that, it's going to be half of it, if not just a smidge more, are going to be nitrification inhibitors.
Great, and you did touch on economics, so I'm going to leave that one alone.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mario, for being here and presenting today.